I don't think I slept at all for like the first 2 or 3 weeks when he first came home, because I would just be upstairs in our bedroom crying and he would be downstairs in our basement, watching his shows. He didn't even know that I was upstairs crying, but I was just so worried about everything. My name is Lindsay Heimer. We live in Plainfield, Illinois. My husband was diagnosed with stage 4 renal cell carcinoma with brain and lung mets in August of 2024. I basically went from just being wife and mom to wife, mom, full-time caregiver, because he was admitted into a hospital and they basically had to do a craniotomy on him. So he was not able to take care of himself for several months. We had gone to Europe for 2 weeks in June, and while we were in Europe, he was extremely forgetful when we were there, but he's usually pretty forgetful. So we weren't really thinking anything was amiss. And then we got back in the middle of June. And in August, I walked into our bedroom and he was laying on our bed right before he went to work. And he works a lot. So he works at a power plant. So he is working all the time. I mean, he works 12-hour days. Some days it's like 15 days in a row he's working. But he was sitting on our bed and he looked at me and he said, "I don't know what's wrong with me, but something feels really wrong." He said, "My heart is just jumping out of my chest." And he kind of just like laid on our bed, and he never does that. He's not like he works out, he's very on the move all the time. And I thought to myself, something seems really weird here. And then the next day after work, he came home and he said that he had a really hard time driving home. And he had to really concentrate and hold his hands on the wheel because he said that he couldn't keep his car in between the lines, and that his heart was palpitating again. So he made an appointment at his primary care doctor and basically thought that he was just having an anxiety attack, maybe because he was working so much. And they were going to tell him to just chill out on the work because at that point he was working like 134 hours in a pay period. So he went to the doctor. They told him that he had AFib, his heart was beating out of rhythm, and they sent him to the emergency room. And that is kind of where everything began, is once he got to the emergency room. He had called me, told me they were sending him to the emergency room. It was right down the street from his doctor's office, but it was about 20 minutes away from our house in a town called Aurora. So I told him to just keep me posted. He had told the cardiologist that came in to see him about his heart that he was having a hard time taking in a full breath. So she ordered a CT scan, of his abdomen just to make sure that there was nothing amiss inside of there. And he had called me and told me not to come to the hospital because he thought he was going to be discharged in just a little bit with some medication. So several hours passed by and he was still there, and he called me and said that they were possibly going to admit him for the AFib. So I told him that I was going to find somebody to watch our kids because we have 2 little kids, and I was going to come down to the hospital because he hadn't eaten anything all day. So he's like, "Okay, stop at McDonald's and come bring me some." He wanted like 5 cheeseburgers, I think it was. So I stopped at McDonald's on the way. I got in. The results of the CT scan still hadn't come back. And I sat there from probably about 6 o'clock until midnight. And then nobody had come in to talk to us. And he told me at that point, I should just go home to be with the kids. And then later on that night, after I had left, the doctor had come in and said that they found a mass on his kidney and a mass on his lung. When I got to the hospital, the doctor was in the room sitting on the bed with him. And it's kind of funny because my husband is not a super emotional guy. So the doctor was kind of sitting on the bed and it looked like he was trying to hold his hand almost and be very comforting to him. But my husband was just kind of like, it was just funny because I walked into the scene and I was like, uh-oh, something's very serious. And they basically said, "We suspect that your husband has kidney cancer that has spread to his lungs. And we're going to do a biopsy later on today of the kidney just to, figure out what it is." And at that moment, I was like, oh my gosh, cancer was not even on the radar for us. We thought it was probably like kidney stones or, I was explaining everything away. So I sat up there with him that first day. And he also, because of his AFib, he had the heart monitor on, and they were trying to figure out what that was all about. So they had people coming in to do the echoes, because that was what started the whole situation. With him going into the hospital was the heart issues. And we found out later on that day that he was also in heart failure. So he had heart failure with 22% ejection fraction. And then he was also diagnosed with renal cell carcinoma that same day. And then that night I had gone home, and the next morning when I went in, I looked at the whiteboard in his hospital room, and it had said they were going to do an MRI of the brain. And I kind of knew at that moment that they had suspected that it was also spread to his brain. But they hadn't told us anything. I'm not exactly where that came in along the board, or if that's just something that they normally do. They hadn't mentioned to us the day before at all that they had suspected that it had spread to his brain. So when I came in and I saw that on the whiteboard, I had a really bad feeling in my heart that they thought it was way more serious than just his lung and his kidney. So when that MRI result came back, it had shown that he had a pretty sizable tumor on his brain, and it was swelling his brain, and it shifted the midline of his brain over. So at that point, they had decided to transfer him to a hospital in Chicago, Rush University, for a higher level of care. So they transported him from Aurora, Illinois to Chicago, Illinois, and they admitted him into the neuro ICU. I immediately cried. He's not a super emotional guy, so he's very stoic. So what he said was, "Man, come on, don't you have any type of good news for me?" He's like, "Or are you just going to keep shooting some bad stuff at me?" And the doctor kind of laughed, and he was like, "I'm sorry." He's like, "This, I don't have any good news for you right now," is essentially what he said. But I was crying. I was very scared because I had gone home and started Googling, and he still hadn't started Googling yet. Actually, he's never Googled, not even one time since his diagnosis. So I read what Google had to say, and it was very scary. And I was very worried for my daughters. We have 3, and they're 5, 8, and 17. And so I was just imagining life, without him, because the way that the doctors were coming into the room, it seemed like they thought he was going to die at any minute. So I didn't even think he was going to make it out of the hospital at that point. So it was very scary. Once they decided that they were going to do the craniotomy, things moved really fast. They came in the night before. They told us that he was a candidate for surgery. And it was kind of crazy, the timing, because that night Zeph could not remember our address. The nurse in the neuro ICU was asking him his questions for his neuro evaluation that they did every single night. And when she asked him what our address was and what year it was, he thought it was 2017. And he thought our address was our address in the house that we lived in Las Vegas. He did not remember that we lived in Illinois and that we were in Illinois at all. So that was very scary. But the next day he went in for his craniotomy, and they basically took him out of surgery. They had staples down the back of his head, and he was discharged the next day. I have a really big family, so thankfully my sister stayed in town, to watch our kids for us. And the next day they told us he could leave. So I packed up all of his stuff, because he was living in the hospital basically at that point for about 10 days, I think it was, the first hospital. And then we brought all of his stuff to the second hospital. So we got home, and they had given us a list like this long of medications he had to take, and all these things to look out for. And my kids at this point, they knew that Dad was in the hospital, but they're very little, so they didn't exactly know why he was in the hospital. Like, we didn't really go into that with them because our older daughter is very anxious. So he came home, and he had this big bandage on the back of his head, and his head was shaved, in the back where they cracked open his head. And uh, it was it was literally like bringing home a baby. Like it was the scariest moment of my life. I had to go to the pharmacy and fill all of his medications, and I just sobbed to the pharmacist. And she actually came out from behind the counter and gave me a hug. And she's like, "Whatever's going on," she says, "it's going to be okay." And I was like, "Is it going to be okay? Is it going to be okay?" And then got home, got him settled. We have a finished basement. So, and it was August. So he just kind of hung out in the basement because that's his man cave, and it's dark and it's quiet. And so he would just sit down there and nap and watch his shows or whatever. And then I was up here coordinating his appointments, and I was in charge of all of his medications. And for him, when he came home after his brain surgery, he ended up getting the hiccups for like 14 hours a day. So he was miserable, and he was in pain, and he had a lot of headaches, obviously, because they had done brain surgery on him. And then he still had his heart issues going on. So he was just very, very tired, and it was very stressful. Like I don't think I slept at all for like the first 2 or 3 weeks when he first came home, because I would just be upstairs in our bedroom crying, and he would be downstairs in our basement, watching his shows. He didn't even know that I was upstairs crying, but I was just so worried about everything. So those first few days were really, really tough. But, I was just happy for him to be home, and I could go downstairs and I could physically like see him. And he didn't sleep upstairs because his hiccups were crazy, and he was on like a weird schedule with sleeping and stuff like that. He just kind of slept like whenever he felt like sleeping. So he didn't want to bother me. And it was probably better that way, so I could go up there and have like a nice cry all by myself, whenever I felt like it. So it was rough. We found an oncologist. We interviewed a few of them. And the first oncologist said that he would only have about 8 months to live. And we did not like that answer. So we went to the next oncologist, and we loved him. We really feel like he's going to bat for my husband. Like anytime there's anything that's weird or something, the treatment's not working, he's like, we'll just pivot. And he's the one who told us that his cancer is treated more like a chronic condition now instead of a terminal disease. And he really was the first person to give me hope that maybe we still have a future ahead of us, and that life is not going to end, with this diagnosis. But so we found the radiation oncologist. We went through Rush for that, and they ended up doing 5 sessions of SBRT, which is basically where it's like radio surgery. So they just like with precision, the laser beams go into the brain, and they just hit the tumors without damaging the tissue around it. So he did 5 sessions of that. And then he started 3 weeks after that, when everything was healed, then he started doing his immunotherapy infusions. And then he also added in the targeted chemo pill. So his treatment's going to last basically for the rest of his life. And he goes, right now, he just started a new immunotherapy. So he's doing dual immunotherapy plus his targeted chemo pill. And he goes right now every 3 weeks for his infusions. Watching him be in pain and watching him go through this, and I cannot change it. I have zero control of the situation. I'm a fixer. So anytime something comes up, I want to fix it. I want him to be around forever. So the hardest part for me is just I cannot fix anything, and I have to see him. He's not suffering, but I have to watch him go through this cancer situation, and there's nothing that I can do to change it or to help him. And that's the worst part. He's always just been so hardworking and independent. And I will say, I think that something I didn't see coming was how much he does end up leaning on me for support, because I just feel like he's always gone through life and just kind of figured it out on his own. And I think that he really has seen how we've all rallied around him, and how, I don't know, I just feel like, I don't know. It's just, I'm sorry. It's so hard to answer that question, because it's just, I just didn't see any of it coming. It's impossible to even put into words how horrible this experience was. I mean, he's doing a lot better now. We're 9 months in, and I'm not really taking care of him anymore. He's like fully back to work, and it was the first like 3 months. He's back to work. He works out, 4 or 5 days a week. He got a cardioversion done on his heart, so his heart is back in regular rhythm. His heart failure has been reversed through medication, so he's doing really, really well right now. It was those beginning months, the first 3 months of from diagnosis until after surgery, about 3 months, that I was full blown taking care of him. Now he's back to his, self, unless he's having side effects. And then I'm immediately on like Chat GTP or Google, and I'm like, how can we help this side effect? And I'm buying stuff off Amazon, like the little socks and, like to help his feet and all this stuff. So, I mean, it's been a wild ride. I honestly long for being blissfully ignorant to the fact that these things happen. You know what I mean? I feel a lot stronger. My mom, when this all started happening, was like, "You are really strong." She's like, "You don't even know how strong you are." She's like, "Look what you're doing." She's like, "You're managing the kids. You're managing the house. You're managing Zeph's health." She's like, "You're taking care of all of his appointments." She's like, "You're still cooking dinner and you're still cleaning the house and you're still doing all this stuff." She's like, "Look at all these amazing things you're doing." And I was just like, okay, I will say that I'm a lot stronger than I was, but I don't necessarily want to be this strong. You know what I mean? I wish that we could go back to, I know we can't, but I wish sometimes that we could go back to just before, the before times, I call them. You have to look for the blessings in every single day. And the biggest takeaway that I've learned from this whole situation is that you have to take every day as it comes. You cannot look in the future because it will freak you out. You can't look into the past because it'll make you sad, but you have to take it exactly one day at a time and live in the present moment. That would be my advice to anybody going through any kind of scary health or cancer diagnosis. One day at a time. It's all you can do. That's it. Sometimes even a minute at a time during the day.